We're back once again, exploring the disturbing side of Reddit. It was Thursday, June 12th, 2025. In the late evening in the city of Toruń, Poland, a young woman was walking home from work, speaking with her long-distance boyfriend on the phone as she did every night. It was a quiet routine, one that helped them feel close despite the distance between them. Then, without warning, she screamed. The call disconnected. He tried to ring her again, but there was no answer. He sent messages that went unread, and soon her phone appeared to be off entirely. Sitting thousands of miles away, he had no way to reach local authorities and no friends nearby to call for help. So, he turned to the one place where strangers often listen. He opened Reddit. Something happened to my girlfriend 30 minutes ago walking home from work. If anyone is in Toruń and has the ability to get in contact with law enforcement, please reach out. We were talking on the phone as we usually do when she was walking home from work. It's only a few kilometers away from her house, and she started screaming and yelling, and the call dropped and her phone is off. I've contacted everyone I know near her that I could, but it's late there right now. I've called the US Embassy, been transferred to local departments, and no local PD is picking up. I don't know what else to do. I'm in the US currently. If anyone can assist, please comment and DM, and I will provide names and last locations. The post went up at around 1 in the morning, local time. Most people in Poland were asleep. The subreddit was quiet, and aside from a few users who happened to be online, almost no one noticed it. And it stayed that way for hours. When morning came, new users scrolling through the subreddit began to see it sitting near the top of the page. At the same time, local Polish news outlets started reporting what had happened that evening in Toruń. Late that night, in Glacier Park, on Jakubski Przedmieście Street, a 24-year-old woman named Klaudia Karkowska was attacked while walking home from work. It was after 1 in the morning when a man nearby heard her screams through his window. He called the police, then ran outside to help. His quick reaction scared the attacker off before he could finish what he started. Within the hour, officers were searching the city. They eventually found a 19-year-old man trying to run and took him into custody. He turned out to be from Venezuela and had only been in Poland a few months. Reports say he was drunk when he was arrested and that he refused to answer any of the investigators' questions. Claudia was taken to hospital in critical condition. She'd been stabbed several times and left barely alive. Early reports couldn't even agree on what weapon was used. Some said a knife, and others claimed it was a screwdriver. And one man, who claimed he saw what happened, gave a description that was almost impossible to process. He ran up, stabbed her twice in the eyes with a screwdriver, gouged out her eyes, and the screwdriver reached her brain. If she survives, she'll probably be a vegetable for the rest of her life. A dozen or so blows to the neck, a dozen or so punches to the stomach. He was scared off when the girl was halfway undressed. The man who attacked her was identified as Yomikert RS, 19 years old, also living in Toruń. He was kept in custody while investigators collected evidence. Court documents later showed he faced life in prison. Doctors fought to save Claudia for nearly 2 weeks before she died from her injuries. The prosecutor's office confirmed her death and said an autopsy would determine if the charges would be changed from attempted murder to murder. In the days that followed, Toruń reacted. Protests began in the city centre and moved toward Glacier Park, where the attack had happened. Groups carried signs, chanted slogans, and shouted at police. Some called it a tragedy. Others used it as fuel for anti-immigrant anger. Back on Reddit, the tone of the thread changed completely. It was no longer confusion or advice, but silence. People posted links to the articles, realizing that the man's post from that night was genuine, and expressed their condolences. It really had been a cry for help. He'd written it as his girlfriend was being attacked, hoping that someone, or anyone, might see it in time. But no one did. Back in July of 2014, a Redditor asked, "Former cult members, or friends of cult members of Reddit, what is your creepiest, scariest, or most disturbing story, and is that what made you leave?" Most of the replies were short. A few talked about strict parents, about isolation, or being told who they could and couldn't speak to. But one comment stood out. It came from someone who said they'd grown up inside a Christian organization called ATI. It was part of a larger movement known as the Institute in Basic Life Principles, founded in the early 1960s by an American minister named Bill Gothard. His teachings were built around hierarchy and control. Men held authority over women, parents over children, and obedience was considered the highest form of faith. Families who followed the program homeschooled their children, limited outside contact, and shaped their entire lives around what Gothard taught. For decades it grew quietly, spreading through churches and families across the United States. But for the people born into it, that kind of obedience often meant silence. And in this Reddit comment, one former member explained what that silence really looked like. I was part of a fundamentalist Christian cult known as ATI or IBLP. Recent scandals have hit the news about the cult leader Bill Gothard when over 50 women came forward with allegations that he sexually harassed them. But that's only scratching the surface. Let me tell you my scariest experience, and just keep in mind, I'm far from the only one. First off, throughout my childhood, my father and sisters abused me. Since the cult taught a strict familial hierarchy, with the father being top dog, then mother, then children in order of birth, as the youngest I was bottom of the totem pole. My father would twist Bible verses to justify abuse, death threats, and more. Because ATI is a homeschool cult, it was really handy to cover up the abuse from any prying eyes. My home was a prison for 11 years until he died of a massive heart attack. And that's not even the scariest experience. Fast forward 2 years, I'm 13, with a mother who's frantically fixated on me being a troubled child because 1, I dared resist my father's advances and argue against the abuse I was suffering, gaining me the reputation of rebellious. 2, I'm severely depressed because I'm a freaking abuse victim and depression is considered sin. And 3, I asked too many questions as to why we believed the things we believed. You don't ask questions, needless to say. So, she calls some cult members here and there, pulls some strings, and long story short, she gets me placed in a secretive program called the Log Cabin Program. They tell her very little details about it, and she tells me even less. All I know is I'm about to move to Oklahoma for a while, to be fixed by nice counselors, because I'm a dirty sinner. Wednesday, July 11th, 2001. I'm dropped off at a locked-down compound in the middle of nowhere near Skiatook, Oklahoma, called the Eagle Springs Training Center. They pose as a residential childcare facility for appearance's sake. This means my mother literally signs over custody of me, her own child, to a bunch of strangers in a compound in the middle of nowhere and leaves me there and goes back home far away. They assure her I'm in good hands. For the next 2 years, I'm tortured, brainwashed, starved, sleep-deprived, threatened with a shotgun, punished, humiliated, interrogated, and terrorized. I lost 40 pounds in the first month or 2. They take me off my medications, believing it is wrong to take them, and go cold turkey. I exhibit severe symptoms of withdrawal, and they go ignored. I am worked grueling hours, sent on aimless hikes and marches, scrubbing floors on my hands and knees until my knuckles are cracked and bleeding from the bleach, and punished with hard labor until I'm near fainting. They had fun coming up with new and strange punishments. This implies that it's deserved, when in fact they're instructed specifically to break their students' will whatever it takes. One was a forced vow of silence. You were told never to speak for days or weeks on end. If you do, you're punished further. I was given tasks designed to fail, for example, extremely short time limits on difficult tasks, in order to be punished and humiliated. I was forced to grovel and confess humiliating sins, existent and non, in front of the 30 or so members in the compound. I was given spoiled, undercooked foods and even chemically treated water that burned my throat and left me horribly sick. I was placed in solitary confinement for 2.5 weeks while they blared music to torture me. The song lyrics went, "Trust in the Lord, he makes no mistakes. He knoweth the end of each path that we take. For when I am tried and purified, I shall come forth as gold." Basically, it was a blatant message. You're being tortured because God loves you, and he's going to put you through fire to melt you into gold, and gave me endless confessional papers to complete detailing what a terrible sinner I am. I was interrogated for hours on end, as well as hypnotized. I was screamed at and exercised for hours on end. I had no privacy. Even going to the bathroom, they would stand outside the door. I could go on and on and on. I was there for 2 years. The scariest part of all of this is that I am far from the only one. The log cabin program was run in Oklahoma, Indiana, and I believe an alternate version for Russian orphans was done elsewhere, either Indiana or Illinois. All of these programs secretly tortured and brainwashed children and teenagers. Many of them were so-called delinquents. They had committed minor, petty crimes, who were ordered by judges to be shipped to these compounds and held against their wills. This runs very deep. It's never been accounted for and probably never will be. They tried to investigate alarming allegations of child abuse, some of which included beatings in Indianapolis, and the whole thing got swept under the rug. The only thing you got to hear about on the news was Gothard feeling up a bunch of women. You never hear about his systematic child torture programs. Bill Gothard and IBLP simply have their fundamentalist hands in too many pies. They will probably never be caught. One user asked, "How did you escape the camp at all?" She replied by writing, "Eventually my mother accepted me back as her daughter. For those 2 years, she would take me home for vacation once in a while, only after several months of breaking me had passed, so that they knew I would be too terrified and brainwashed to report anything while at home. But if I dared to ask, she would essentially tell me I wasn't good enough to be her daughter just yet. Then eventually, I had the good fortune of getting dangerously ill while on one of these vacations at home. I was sick for 2 months, in and out of hospitals. She got used to me being around after 2 months, and I guess since I was so traumatized and too scared to be anything but ridiculously compliant, she was satisfied. She requested my return, and that was my escape. The worst thing about this, though, is that it's not a hard story to believe. Back in the 1980s, there was already trouble at the top. Bill Gothard's brother Steve, who helped run the organization, resigned after affairs with several secretaries. Writers from Midwest Christian Outreach later said Bill admitted misconduct during that period, stepped aside for a time, then returned and filled board seats with people who backed him. By 2014, those same stories had grown louder. More than 50 women came forward accusing Bill Gothard of harassment and of ignoring reports of child abuse within the organization, leading to his resignation that same year. An internal review by the board said he had acted in an inappropriate manner and permanently barred him from any position of leadership or counseling. Then, in October of 2015, a civil lawsuit was filed in DuPage County, Illinois, against both Gothard and the Institute in Basic Life Principles. It accused them of covering up years of abuse involving minors. The plaintiffs asked for damages and also requested that the court stop the organization from moving more than $100 million in assets while closing its Illinois headquarters and relocating to Texas. By early 2016, 16 women and 2 men had joined the case. They described manipulation, harassment, and abuse that stretched back decades. The lawsuit was dismissed in 2018 because the statute of limitations had run out, but the stories themselves were never disproven. So when you look at everything that's been said about the organization over the years, the Reddit comment doesn't sound far-fetched. It sounds like a first-hand account of something that's been happening quietly for a very long time, and something that continues to fester in the darkness today. There are millions of Reddit accounts out there, and most belong to ordinary people who post for a few months and move on, whilst others disappear after a single comment. But every so often, you'll come across one that feels different. Because sometimes, when you scroll through a stranger's history, you realize you're not just looking at their hobbies or their thoughts, you're looking at the traces of someone who's no longer here. Or worse, someone whose name would later make the news, for all the wrong reasons. Scrolling through his account, nothing really stands out at first. He posted about small hobbies, things like Tamagotchis, Digimon, and Nerf guns. He'd comment on other people's collections, reply to questions, even share a few photos of his own. His posts were consistent and normal, but out of everything he ever shared, there's one post that stands out. Because once you see what's in it, you realize exactly who this account belonged to. On October 31st, 2020, the user Sustinet posted, "The finished product. My girlfriend's 9-year-old daughter planned and painted this scheme, with a bit of help from me on the helmet and small bits. She is very proud, and it looks pretty darn good. Your girlfriend's 9-year-old daughter paints better than any pro painter I've ever seen on eBay. She says thank you, and wow, she didn't know she did so well." Scrolling through the photos, they show the figure from multiple directions, until we reach the last image. The girl in the image is Madeleine Soto, meaning the owner of the Reddit account was Stefan Michael Stearns, who at the time of this post being uploaded had been abusing her for years. On the morning of February 26th, 2024, staff at her middle school reported that she never arrived to class. The next day, police began asking the public for help. Disturbingly, body cam footage shows her mother, Jen Soto, speaking with officers outside their home, explaining that she'd dropped Madeleine off near school that morning. Standing beside her, silent with his arms crossed, was her then boyfriend, Stefan Michael Stearns. A search for Madeleine began on February 28th, 2 days after she was reported missing, led by the Orange County Sheriff's Office. On March 1st, her body was found in a wooded area near Kissimmee. The case quickly shifted from a missing person to a homicide investigation. A later report confirmed that Madeleine had died from strangulation. Investigators soon uncovered surveillance footage of Stearns on the morning she disappeared. He was seen throwing several items into a dumpster, which were later identified as Madeleine's backpack and her school-issued laptop. On February 28th, police questioned Stearns, who was then 37 years old and living in Kissimmee. He agreed to let detectives search his phone. Inside, they found hundreds of photos and videos showing Stearns abusing Madeleine, with some of the recordings dating back to when she was just 8 years old. The same evidence was also found on his Google Drive. Stearns attempted to have the material excluded from the investigation, arguing that it had been obtained without a warrant, but the evidence was ruled admissible. In April 2024, a grand jury indicted Stearns for the murder of 13-year-old Madeleine Soto. The 9th Judicial Circuit State Attorney's Office announced plans to seek the death penalty, citing the extent and severity of the crimes. Stearns' defense attorney argued that capital punishment violated the 5th, 6th, 8th, and 14th Amendments, calling it cruel and unusual, but the prosecution continued to pursue it. In total, the state attorney's office filed 60 separate charges against Stearns, including 8 counts of physical assault involving a child under 12, 5 counts involving a child between 12 and 18, 7 counts of inappropriate contact, and 40 counts of unlawful possession of materials depicting the exploitation of minors. Each possession charge involved at least 10 images, meaning Stearns had potentially stored hundreds of files. The affidavit also stated that Stearns was in a position of familial or custodial authority at the time of several of the sexual batteries. On July 21, 2025, Stearns pleaded no contest to the charge of first-degree murder and guilty to all 60 counts of sex crimes. Later that afternoon, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, receiving 1 life sentence for the murder of Madeleine Soto and 20 more for the sexual offences. Looking back at that post now, it's almost impossible to read it the same way. What once looked like a harmless hobby photo is now something deeply disturbing. The casual tone in the comments, and even the way he wrote about her, takes on a different meaning once you know who he was and what he was already doing at the time. Somewhere in that thread, people were complimenting his painting, completely unaware that the man behind the screen was living a double life, and that the child he spoke about with pride was a victim he would eventually murder. That's the dangerous thing about Reddit. Behind every username, every post, every friendly reply, there's a person you can never fully see. And sometimes, the truth about who they are is far darker than anyone could imagine. It was late at night, on July 19th, 2025, when a user opened Reddit and began to type. He said his friend had told him something awful, something he couldn't get out of his head. Naturally, he had posted into the True Off My Chest subreddit, looking for guidance on support. The issue, though, was that his friend had done something much darker than anyone expected. My friend told me something awful, and I can't stop thinking about it. David and I have been friends since high school. My high school had a thing where the freshman students would be assigned a senior to show them around, and that's how I met him. I was assigned to David. In high school, David started dating a girl named Sammy. They were the stereotypical high school sweetheart couple, going on cheesy dates and sending each other love letters, that type of couple. Well, they got married after college and were due to have a baby in April. However, Sammy had complications while giving birth and ended up passing away from excessive bleeding, leaving David as a single father to his newborn daughter. David, understandably so, hasn't been taking it well at all. For the first month or so, his parents were helping him take care of his daughter, but had to go back home as they live about an hour away. Since then, I've been helping David as much as I can, as we live in the same town. Last night, he called me at about 2 a.m. and told me to come over because he needed to talk to me about something important. Even though he had woken me up, I wasn't about to leave him alone, so I drove to his house and found him sitting on his front step drinking a beer. It was clear he had been crying, and that definitely wasn't his first drink. He told me to sit with him, so I did. What he tells me next is what I can't stop thinking about. David tells me that Sammy never wanted to have kids, but David did. He explained how having kids had become a hot topic in their house, and he was worried it would ruin their marriage. He didn't want her to leave him and also wanted a baby, so he chose to sabotage her birth control and convince her to keep the pregnancy. He tells me that now he believes that her death is his fault, and said that he can't look at their daughter without feeling guilty and like a murderer. I was genuinely at a loss for words. I didn't know what to think, and I honestly still don't. After his confession, I just convinced him to go to bed and tried not to think about what he just told me. I'm not even sure what to think anymore. This whole situation is disgusting. That was 3 days ago, and I've kept in contact with him until I can figure out what to do next. I just genuinely don't know what to do now. The post received hundreds of comments from people urging him to report it, or at least convince his friend to get therapy. Whether he ever took their advice, or if anything came of that night, no one really knows, and I've not been able to find any credible news reports that align with the timing of the birth or post. The account has since been deleted, and the moderators removed the post soon after. All that's left are the comments, still sitting there, left wondering what really happened next. Some years ago, a Reddit user began posting about someone who wouldn't leave her alone. She didn't name him, but she described the fear, the late-night knocks, the messages, and the sense that he was always nearby. The internet offered advice, reassurance, and a false sense of safety. But what happened next was something no one could have prepared her for. Anyone had success with private investigators? For the past 6 months, I've been relentlessly stalked and had threats against my life made from someone I dated for a month. It started with phone calls upwards of 45 to 50 a day. 50-page text messages, and him showing up outside of my house at 5 a.m. When I wouldn't comply or feed the negative attention, I began to receive threats and claims that he would murder me and get away with it, saying all he would have to do is flee the country, and telling me he shouldn't have to force me to be his friend or give him another chance, or else. Every time I blocked his number from contacting me, he would then call me from different ones, try and pretend to be other people, or have his friends, or sometimes even random strangers he'd ask on the street. I once scared an unsuspecting guy half to death after informing him that the person who had just told him to call me was actually stalking me, and I sent him proof. He ended up calling the police on him. He fled, of course. After about 2 months of that, I was evicted from my apartment building due to my neighbours no longer feeling safe because of his looming presence. I then applied for and was granted a temporary protective order, or TPO. A few days afterwards, I received a picture message of the note the Sheriff Civil had left on the door of my stalker's then residence, with a message taunting me. What you are trying to do was stupid, and a restraining order is just a piece of paper. So ultimately, he just ended up avoiding the process. I wasn't being protected at all. On May 31st of this year, I relocated. This did not deter my stalker. He vowed to find wherever I moved to, and threatened that if he couldn't find me, he would be able to find my family, and then proceeded to send me a map of my mother's home, whom he had never met. I also received a message from a woman claiming to be my former landlord, letting me know that I owed a balance on my account, and to avoid late fees, I needed to pay the amount, which I could do with the link provided in the message. Turns out it was my stalker pretending to be a woman, and the link turned out to be a tool used to grab the user's IP address when they click the link. Upon this discovery, I changed my phone number and began to systematically dismantle any trace of an online presence I once had. This action only seemed to anger him, and before deleting the profiles outright, I would attempt to block him from contacting me. Each and every time I blocked one, he simply created a new one and proceeded to contact me as if nothing had happened. 12 different Reddit accounts, 9 different Tumblrs, 10 different Instagrams, 3 Meetup accounts, 4 Facebooks, with which he changed his location to that of my hometown, and proceeded to add nearly everyone from my graduating class in high school, and even 3 Duolingo accounts and MySpace. Yes, MySpace. I then received an empty package from him, addressed to my former residence with the declaration, "Address correction requested. Do not forward." I'm assuming he thought that the post office would adhere to his requests and return the package to him with my new corrected address on it. By mid-July, he created a profile using my photos and likeness to threaten my family, and when I didn't respond, he proceeded to post semi-nude pictures of me on the profile in an attempt to blackmail me into speaking with him. I didn't, and contacted Twitter to report the account and have it removed, which they eventually did. On the 21st of August, I awoke at around 8 p.m. to vigorous knocking and ringing of my doorbell. I look out my window to see who it is, and I was horrified to see my stalker there. I called the police, and of course he fled once again. Over 7 separate police reports have been filed. This incident was followed by threatening emails from my stalker, demanding that I meet him somewhere, or because he had found me, that next time I would wake up to gunshots, and that if I didn't, he would first taser me and assault me, using my boyfriend's blood as lube. This past Sunday night, I woke up at 6:45 a.m. to the ringing and banging again. I proceeded to record him on video while I was on the phone with the police. He fled on foot once again, and I was hit with the same hoopla from law enforcement. Well, we can't really do much because technically at this point he's not doing anything wrong. Then why does he flee, I wonder? I obtained a TPO again, but I have no solid address for this dangerous person, which is why I'm in dire need of a private investigator to assist with finding said residence, so this person can be served. I hope you might be able to refer me to someone who might be able to assist me. I've developed insomnia, depression, anxiety, and paranoia. I'm completely isolated. I am 22 years old, and I have no social life anymore. I have 0 friends. I've become a shell of my former self. I've faced eviction and lost a job because of this man's behavior, and I don't know how much longer I can survive. There's actually so much more filler shit that he has done to terrorize me, But for the sake of this already lengthy post, I tried to condense it. I have proof in the form of recordings, event diaries, and copies of all of his threats, interactions, and attempts to communicate, and would be more than willing to email them to show I'm not lying. I'm in Las Vegas, if that helps at all. Weeks went by, and the post faded down the front page like so many others do. Commenters had offered advice, everything from buying cameras to getting a gun, but most people assumed that once the thread went quiet, things had calmed down. Except they hadn't, because 2 weeks later, the same user came back with an update. But this time, it wasn't a request for help. It was an explanation of what had just happened. I'm writing this staring at the mess the police left for me, in a bit of a fog. After 6 months of stalking and threats against my life, my stalker finally snapped and decided to kick my door in and make good on his promise. Out of fear, the past month I had begun sleeping with a chair propped against my front door, to give myself a few extra precious seconds in case of an emergency. I shudder to think how differently things might have turned out had I not barricaded the door. I awoke at around 1:15 a.m. to the sound of the door giving way after one kick, followed by the sounds of my stalker struggling to dislodge the chair while forcing his way inside. I jumped up and grabbed the gun I've learned to do everything, even shower with. I stood at the top of my stairs and fired twice, hitting him in the chest. I hear his scream, his disbelief that I'd stood up for myself. 0 to 100 in milliseconds. I've never been so afraid in my life. I don't know if he's living, but I do know the police have him, and that's what helps the most. For months of him evading the police, I began to question whether he was unstoppable, untraceable. Houdini. He would murder me and get away with it. As of now, I'm in a haze of guilt, surprise, relief, and disbelief. I shook as the canines drag him out from his hiding place under a bush. I survived where so many people do not. Holy shit, I survived. Those who believe there was other things to be done have never had someone tell you that you no longer deserve to draw breath and mean it. And for the should have fired a warning shot, folks, there are no warning shots. A gun is a deadly force. You only pull that trigger if you are in fear for your life, and all other methods of deterring are gone. When he kicked my door in, there was no longer a deterrent preventing harm. Warning shots are dangerous and could hurt the unintended. This is not a Wild West movie. That's what responsible gun ownership is. I'll update once things have calmed down a bit, I promise. I'll write back to everyone, and after being isolated for so long, to anyone who wants to be friends, I'm always accepting those. Weeks after that update, news reports confirmed what she had described. Police said that her stalker, Douglas Eugene Jackson, had forced his way through her front door in the middle of the night. She fired twice, hitting him in the chest before he ran. Officers later found him hiding in a set of bushes nearby. He was arrested and taken into custody. Jackson survived the shooting and was sentenced to prison. But even that didn't stop him. 6 years later, in 2020, he was arrested again, this time for stalking another woman while on parole for the earlier attack. Investigators found that he had been sending threatening text messages for months, targeting her family, her friends, and even her dog. He was charged with aggravated stalking and sentenced to 15 years in prison. In 2023, a woman named Dacia Washington posted on TikTok claiming to be the same person who had shared her story on Reddit years earlier. She explained how what started as a short-lived relationship had turned into months of harassment, surveillance, and threats. She spoke about filing report after report, moving homes, and finally deciding to arm herself when she realized the police couldn't protect her. In her video, she described the moment he broke through her door, the fear she felt, and how she made the choice to defend herself. I've been unable to find the original TikToks on her profile, but she has a copy of the videos available on YouTube, so I'll leave a link to them in case you wanted to check it out. Back on Reddit, her post has since been removed, but recoverable through the Wayback Machine. When she asked for help, she wasn't looking for comfort or opinions. She was trying to survive. And though she lived to tell her story, her post remains as proof of just how real those fears were. Some posts are written by people living through things most of us can't even imagine, shouting into the darkness and crying out for help. when no one is listening.